Welcome to Viewpoints. I'm Heather Isfaron, and today Brian Lee, commander of the Phoenix Police Department, is visiting. Brian, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Great. So your research centered around drone usage in municipal cities. And I just wanted to take a minute and talk to you about the breadth of the research and maybe some of the recommendations that you have. First, let's identify the problem.
Okay. Well, looking around my own organization, I saw that there was a gap. There was, with the emergence of the new technology, including unmanned aerial systems, I was first introduced to it during our planning and preparation for one of the past Super Bowls, and quickly learned that we were ill-positioned to be able to deal with those or to address questions from the public, from a citizen standpoint as well as a law application standpoint on how we would enforce those. So that was really my initial opening to this as an issue, and saw that the more I looked into the matter, that other agencies across the entire nation were struggling with the same questions.
It seems to me, as I travel around the country, that in almost every city, I haven't seen a perfect drone or unmanned aerial vehicle usage policy anywhere. Right. So let's talk about the type of research that you conducted and how you went about attacking the question.
Well, the first thing for me, because I was completely inexperienced in drone usage at all, I had to do a lot of research, including going back into the military applications, which was really the genesis and the roots of the systems that we see today. After going into that, I learned about the new commercial applications as well as the hobbyist versions that are currently available on the market. And for me, I had to encompass everything from the legal channels, the privacy issues, the potential threats that these things can cause, what are the current public safety applications, if any, and then how does it impact the citizens where these devices are being operated.
And the FAA comes into this as well, right? Didn't they have
Correct. The FAA, right at the time I started my research, was in sort of a policy pause, if you will, where there hadn't been any new legislation that had come forward, but the emergence of the technology was occurring more rapidly than policy and technology or policy and federal law could keep up with. So that being the case, we had to find a stopgap measure, and agencies were starving for information about how best to proceed to address that issue until there was some federal guidance.
And so what would you say, as you looked across the country and all these different considerations that you had, what were the top threats as you saw them in terms of making a good policy? Well,
the deeper I dug, the more I learned that I had to dig deeper. Yes. There were more questions, it seemed, than answers at the time. But I quickly realized that there was a very broad spectrum to this subject matter, and that you couldn't make a decision on one area without it impacting or having a cascading effect on several other affected areas. So from the threat perspective, one of the things that I saw that was missing was that there was this common conception among the U.S. populace, looking across the nation, that there was fear of government overreach and that would be government misuse of these particular devices that would hinder people's ability to have their privacy respected, and that was a big concern. And the aspect that I saw that wasn't being focused on was what is the threat that this poses, not only to public safety, but to the community at large. So that was an area that one of the chapters that I wrote on really specifically addresses that particular threat. Threats to our critical infrastructure, threats to the weaponization or modification of these versatile platforms. It's a very utilitarian design, and most of them can be converted very easily at low cost, which makes them a very favorable option for those who wish to do evil. Mm-hmm. So that was the dimension that I was looking to focus in on with regard to the threat, because I believe that was being overlooked at the time.
And so if we go back to the civil rights part of your thesis, what would give an average citizen a measure of comfort in knowing that people are looking at that and that cities are taking that into consideration as they develop their policies?
Well, most of the cities that I researched, I found that one of the common approaches was that there was a wide community involvement as part of the lexicon for establishing what that policy is going to look like. So there was stakeholder involvement. There were commercial folks that would stand to benefit from the use of these devices. We had the UAS industry representatives that were part of the discussion, as well as private citizens and law enforcement. So we tried to have a wide variety of stakeholders at the table to discuss what those relative impacts would be. And I think that was really hugely beneficial in identifying where the gaps were in the research, which allowed me to focus more directly on those.
And as you had those stakeholders together, because I imagine that's what a lot of other municipalities watching this would want to do, were there any hard stops in terms of kind of a no-go, maybe the private sector or whatever? There are issues, I'm sure.
There are.
Anything that can't be worked out?
I don't think that there's anything that can't be worked out. I think right now most municipalities are struggling with the familiarity of the issue, and especially with regard to privacy on the citizen side and the opportunity for economic growth and prosperity on both the city and the commercial industry side. There has to be a marriage of the two, and there has to be a level of comfort that both can obtain in order to move forward with this policy. Most average citizens are concerned about the drone that's hovering outside their bedroom window or hovering over their swimming pool, and those are real concerns. They're also concerned about the way law enforcement or government intends to use these devices. The police departments in general find themselves in a very awkward space right now, because not only are we very interested in using this technology for our own, to enhance our own public safety services, but we also are the ones charged with doing the enforcement. And so we have to see both sides of that coin, and we have to be able to make sure that the enforcement is equitable for everyone. So that was one of the bigger challenges.
I would imagine. So let's get back to the research and how you conducted that across these areas.
Through these discussions and through my own research, I identified what I believe to be a series of core criteria that would be relevant to any successful discussion or the development of any strategic policy that would govern this. And they were things like, again, the privacy issue. What is the what barriers to entry might we experience? What's the commercial application? What's the overall cost of implementation? So things along those lines were really the areas that I was focusing on. Is there currently a political acceptability within the environment or the climate within a given jurisdiction? And every one of those will be different. And is it legal? I mean, are there current legal guidelines in place to be able to support the adoption of any one solution over another?
And what did you find from that?
I found that within most of the states, there were existing state laws that were in place that could adequately address any violations of misuse of a UAS system by a citizen or even by a government entity should one occur. And that would include everything from somebody who was injured or harmed as a result of one of these devices falling out of the sky and landing on them. The discussion centered heavily around use during large sporting events or large crowded areas. There is adequate state law in most cases to address the privacy concerns, from that standpoint. So for the most part, it didn't appear that there was going to be a whole lot of legislation effort that would have to occur in order for most municipalities to adopt at least an entry-level solution to move forward.
And that is probably a relief to a lot of these cities who, they have to really come up with these pretty quickly if they haven't already. Let's talk more about special event planning and what occurs at these events that might be of concern to the city.
Personally, from the events that I've worked, the large-scale events typically draw a large crowd, and especially when you have multiple venues where there's activities and events that are occurring over an extended period of days, it tends to bring a surge of people into an area that might otherwise not experience that volume of activity. One of the things that I learned through our own experiences was the emergence of these UAS systems that can be purchased, relatively cheaply, that were being launched over large crowds of people. The problem that we experienced was trying to track down who the operator was in a group of 100,000 people. That makes it very difficult to find them. Mm-hmm. The other concern is should there be a malfunction or the operator is inexperienced and doesn't know how to handle the machine properly. We had some of these devices just simply fall out of the sky, and under the current regulations, some of them can be heavy enough to do some serious injury to folks on the ground. Mm-hmm. So from an event management perspective, that was a concern for us. Operationally, we're always concerned about the threat that these pose, because we never know from the ground level if the device that we're seeing is being used for pre-operational incident planning. Is it taking information from restricted areas of our critical infrastructure? And all of those are concerns for us in trying to deter and prevent an incident or an attack against any of these critical infrastructure locations. So that was part of my initial exposure to that, and that's always a concern within the statewide fusion centers as we look to identify better ways of gathering our intelligence more efficiently and being able to disseminate that to other affected jurisdictions and agencies that may also be seeing the same type of activity.
And do you feel that the Fusion Center is able to do that most effectively in terms of getting that information out?
We are in the sense that once we get the information, it's not generated and distributed timely enough to actually catch the violator in the act. But what it does do is increase our own situational awareness throughout the region by sharing information and best practices about what we saw, the type of device we saw, where we saw it being deployed, things that would give law enforcement and public safety first responders that extra edge in detecting it before there's actually an incident that occurs.
And so getting back to your research, what would the top recommendations be for a municipal city leader who would like to generate a sound policy on drones?
Well, the research that I conducted led me to create a series of 4 different alternative outcome solutions. Each solution had a different area that would be considered of paramount importance to that solution. And after going through all 4 of them, I looked at a solution that encouraged the commercial application and use of a UAS system to encourage that economic growth and prosperity. I looked at a solution that made public safety of paramount importance. I looked at a solution that placed cost as the over-carrying burden that had to be addressed. And then the last solution was one that took more of a wait-and-see approach because we are in this catch-up phase where we're waiting for additional guidance from the federal government, and the FAA is still working on it, even with the release of their Part 107 guidelines. It wasn't as extensive, perhaps, as most law enforcement and public safety agencies would have hoped. So there's still some areas that would need to be refined. So in looking at the 4 solutions that I created, the one that actually scored the highest on my evaluation matrix was the one that was encouraging and supportive of a UAS environment that would allow for commercial application use, especially within a downtown sector, so that we have that economic growth and we're promoting tourism, we're promoting economic prosperity for the merchants in the downtown economy.
Well, with all the rebuilding of our inner cities and the need to bring business back, I would think that would be a real popular choice. But it does sound like you've really tried to capture the different types of cultures that public safety and law enforcement would be in order to make a decision. Cost might be an issue. Maybe we'll wait and see. What would be the last, most important part of the research in terms of what did you find for your agency?
Well, from my particular environment, again, taking in those the political culture, the economic temperature, all of the things that affect my particular agency, the solution that scored the highest was the one that did promote the use of UAS systems in a more of a commercial application. Ironically enough, it ended up being the one that is going to be the least efficient for law enforcement. It's going to require a much heavier lift to address some of the secondary impacts of going with that particular decision, which is what I tried to do with each of the 4 solutions. I would present a solution with an objective, but then here's the cascading or the secondary consequences of going with that. So there's a pro and a con to each, and there's always trade-offs to be considered. So for an agency that's considering developing a policy or a solution, I would encourage them to approach it from multiple angles. Take the time to get to know what your current political environment looks like. Find out what the community sentiment is. Find out what your business industry is. And make sure that you meet with all of your public safety first responder partners, including the commercial industry. There's a lot of knowledge to be gained by doing that, and it will allow most of these agencies to be able to make a decision that's going to be in everybody's best interest, but at least it's an informed decision. And most people can live with that once you can show that the due diligence was put into it.
In real life, there will always be consequences no matter which road you take.
Correct.
So just being real about that. So if there was one more chapter you could write in your thesis, now you're graduating this week, so you've just written it, it's hot off the press, what would the next chapter be?
For me, the next chapter would be trying to get a better grasp on the impacts of cyber use with UAS systems, both from a threat model and also proactively to see how they can help us to prevent cyber attacks. There's both sides of that coin could be explored further, but the cyber threat is here. It's currently in use, and we have to be mindful of that. But I also believe that there's a place for public safety to be able to utilize that technology to their own benefit and be a little more proactive in the detection model so that we can prevent these acts in the future.
And it's not just drones that have this issue. I mean, we're talking everything from cars to garage door openers that can be
Correct.
used incorrectly. So it is a big problem, a very complex problem, and we sure do appreciate you taking the time to explain your research. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.